Carbon-plated shoes are pretty clearly associated with racing shoes for the fastest runners. Recently, carbon has also started appearing in so-called super trainers, training and racing shoes meant to be highly versatile. However, they are still talked about in the context of relatively fast runners, and here comes Salomon with their new shoes, the Salomon S Spectur, shoes with carbon that are intended for people running marathons slower than 3.5 hours. Does such targeting make sense? Let's find out. Before I move on to my impressions of running in the Salomon S Spectur, I need to note that I received these shoes for testing from Salomon. Still, no one had any influence on the opinions I present here and on the overall shape of this video. Let's start with the technical aspects. First, the upper. The upper is made of a relatively thin and pleasant to touch material. We have additional plush padding at the back, especially around the heel, so it's very comfortable and soft. The feet generally hold pretty well in this area. Heel counter is slightly raised and slightly reinforced at the back with some kind of strip, but it's still quite flexible, as you can see. It's not like we have some super rigid support here. The upper itself seems to be quite snugly sewn, but in higher temperatures, honestly, I didn't have any significant problems with it. I didn't feel particularly overheated, so that's a plus. The lacing is standard. What is non-standard is that the tongue is not attached to the upper, and it's only held in place by this part here where the laces go through it. That is quite a big drawback for me, because this tongue is long, and when putting on the shoe it would fold over, especially in this part here, make it hard to straighten with just a finger, so the tongue is rather a downside. It's pleasant to the touch, it holds the foot great once you have it on properly, but the process of putting them on and the fact that it folds and shifts is not ideal. Another thing worth mentioning is that the midfoot area is relatively narrow, so if someone has wide feet, these shoes probably won't be a great choice. I have wider feet and felt some rubbing in this specific area during long runs. The front of the shoe is quite spacious, even the area around the toes, so I had no problems here. Everything was fine. As for the midsole, it is built from two different foams, somewhat in the fashion of super trainers than what we have usually in the racing shoes. Here we have the Energy Foam Plus foam here under the foot. It's the supercritical PEBA foam that is soft but offers a high energy return. This is Salomon's racing foam. It's directly under the foot, so we have this PEBA foam under the foot, and below we have EVA foam down here. This is the standard energy foam, the usual foam for logging miles. The more race-oriented foam is on top, the standard one is below, and the full-length carbon plate called Energy Blade is between them. Here we have a little window to see the plate, that the plate is indeed here. And interestingly, we have these two wings on either side. One is here and the second one is visible here. And they show that the plate is slightly curved, which is not much to aid in faster running, but more to support foot stabilization. Does it work that way? They're not like super ultra stable shoes, but I feel that there is a slight support for people with pronation. I also pronate, so these wings might at least reduce some of the issues that I usually have. The stack height is 38 mm under the heel and 30 mm under the forefoot, giving us an 8 mm drop. It is a standard for racing shoes and super trainers, so everything is normal here. As for the outsole, it's covered with rubber quite extensively, and there are not many areas without rubber. It is covered with contact grip, typical Salomon rubber, and grips the ground very well. Generally, the tread is very flat, which is typical for road running shoes. There's not much to say here. It doesn't wear out much, at least not after the kilometers I have run in them, because there's, well, not much to wear out. So this is quite good. Another interestingly thing is the back here, this part. It looks quite futuristic, I would say. Honestly, I have no idea what purpose it serves. Whether it's to help the foot roll better. For me, it was a bit of a extravagance. I didn't see any specific function for this specific cut. This cut might make the shoes a bit lighter than they would be if we had full foam coverage here. The shoe in size 44 and 2/3 EU weighs 260 grams, which is quite acceptable for racing shoe. Racing shoes are usually a bit lighter, but it is not a racing shoe for super fast runners, but rather a super trainer, so this result is quite acceptable. Here, I certainly won't complain. As for the sizing, I have size 44 and 2/3 EU, which is 10 UK and 10.5 US. And this is a bit smaller size that I would typically take for running shoes, but despite that, I still have quite a bit of room in the toe box. So it should be noted that Salomon's sizing might be, I never know whether to say it runs large or small. In any case, if you buy a slightly smaller size, it will probably still be fine. Let's move on to my running impressions. Initially, I was skeptical about this marketing based on running pace, but I must admit that after these tens of kilometers I logged into the S-Lab Specturs, I saw some sense in it. Assuming that the Specturs are supposed to perform best at a pace of around 4:59 minutes per kilometer and slower because that's the pace for a marathon in about 3.5 hours, that's exactly the case. A pace of 4:45 to 5 minutes per kilometer was quite pleasant for me here, and I felt I could maintain it for a long time. But the faster I ran, the more I missed some kind of wow effect. You know, either a bit of support from the plate or a more significant energy return from the PEBA foam. Yes, short runs could be run faster, but the enjoyment of the run was much less than, for example, in the Saucony Endorphin Speed 4 that I was testing simultaneously. Of course, I must note that this does not mean you can't run comfortably and quickly in these shoes. It depends, of course, on your training level and your preferences. At my current level, faster running in the Specturs was okay, but only on shorter sessions. On longer sections, I preferred to run at more relaxed pace. Honestly, after a few training sessions, I started to wonder what the point was of calling this shoe racing shoes for slower runners, instead of just saying that they are super trainers and that's it. Because over these tens of kilometers, I can say that the Salomon S Spectur is quite a decent, well, super trainer. We have a lot of racing foam here. There's a carbon plate, but the shoes feel much more durable than average racing shoes, so it's a typical super trainer case. Additionally, they handle easy runs very well. In my case, the longest run was a half marathon distance, and I felt comfortable throughout the whole training. The upper is very pleasant to the touch and wraps the foot well. The foam is soft enough that during long runs the legs do not get tired as much. And that carbon plate, as I mentioned earlier, stabilizes the foot a bit. Accelerating on intervals is pleasant, but only for a while. The first few repetitions on fresh legs go well in these shoes, but the S-Lab Specturs don't help as much when fatigue sets in. Then you also see that the foam in the midsole and the carbon plate here are rather to support comfort and stabilization, and there is a lack of that push-forward effect. Do I recommend the Salomon S Spectur as racing shoes? Rather not because they are inherently bad shoes, but rather because firstly the price is a bit high, around $220 or 220 euros, a bit steep and I know that there are more expensive racing shoes, but these are not typical racing shoes. They are rather their, let's call it, younger sibling. And secondly, I'm not convinced they would help me maintain form to the end in a race. These intervals and the significant fatigue in a second half of the training sessions suggest that it might be challenging when heavily fatigued. But of course, each person is different and everyone may react differently to carbon shoes, as it also depends on that. But do I recommend these shoes as super trainers or daily trainers? If you can ignore the price, then definitely yes. The Salomon S Spectur is an actual do-it-all shoe. No training session is too tough for it. It feels better in some and a bit worse in others, but it never falls below a certain level, and I think that's a massive advantage of these shoes. Of course, there is also the topic of training in carbon shoes, which is a big topic for another day. Still, if we have in our running rotation some so-called regular shoes and also have the S Specturs, then with proper strength training it shouldn't be a big problem, mainly since the plate in the Specturs works a bit differently than in standard racing shoes. Moreover, the manufacturer states that these shoes are suitable for 2 or 3 runs per week, and I'm quite willing to agree with that. Tempo training and probably long runs can be done in the S-Lab Specturs, and other easy runs can be done in something else. I think these are perfect shoes in Salomon's lineup, but they are not exactly what Salomon probably intended them to be. I mean, I wouldn't call them racing shoes even if they were to be racing shoes for slower runners. They are excellent super trainers, and that's how I see it. That's all for today. Thanks a lot for watching. Of course, leave a subscription, like, and whatever else if you want more running content, and see you in the next shoe review, probably very soon.